Picture a quiet Friday night diner, neon lights buzzing loudly in heavy rain. A couple sits in a faded corner booth, exhausted, genuinely just wanting a warm meal. They do not look like much. Scuffed leather jackets, tired eyes, muddy boots. Suddenly, a patrol officer storms inside, hand resting heavily on his dark holster, eyes locked on them with pure prejudice. He thinks he is catching a couple of easy targets. He has absolutely no idea he just walked into a federal sting. And those targets are senior undercover detectives. Rain lashed against the greasy glass windows of Harrison's family diner, a local institution nestled deep within the affluent, meticulously manicured suburb of Oak Ridge. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocatingly insulated. Fluorescent lights buzzed with a low, irritating hum, casting a pale, sterile glow over the checkered linoleum floor and red vinyl booths. It was past 11 at night, and the diner was sparsely populated by a handful of late-night regulars, mostly older couples, and a few local teenagers huddled over milkshakes. Darnell Hollister and Selena Martin sat in the corner booth furthest from the door, their backs to the wall, a tactical habit ingrained in them after years on the force. Tonight, however, they were not looking for a fight. They were practically running on fumes. For the past 14 months, Darnell and Selena had been deeply submerged in Operation Ironclad, a joint task force investigation targeting a highly sophisticated narcotics syndicate operating out of the tri-state area. To the untrained eye, the couple sitting in the booth looked rough, entirely out of place in the wealthy enclave of Oak Ridge. Darnell, a broad-shouldered black man with a sharp jawline and piercing brown eyes, wore a faded denim jacket over a dark, heavy hoodie. 14 months of undercover work meant he had grown out a thick, unkempt beard, and his usually pristine posture was currently slumped with sheer exhaustion. Across from him, Selena, a brilliant and fiercely capable black woman, looked equally worn. Her natural hair was pulled back into a messy protective style, and she wore a bulky surplus army jacket that swallowed her petite frame. Underneath that jacket, strapped tightly against her ribs, was a highly sensitive federal wire. It was currently turned off, but the battery was fully charged. They had just wrapped up a grueling, high-stakes meet with a mid-level distributor 3 towns over. The bust was scheduled for the following morning, meaning their covers had to remain absolutely flawless for just 12 more hours. They had stopped at Harrison's simply because they had not eaten solid food in 2 days, surviving entirely on stale coffee and adrenaline. "I swear to God," Darnell murmured, his voice a low, gravelly baritone as he stared at the laminated menu. "If they have decent blueberry pancakes, I might actually cry. Real tears, Selena. I'm not joking." Selena offered a weak, tired smile, her eyes scanning the room out of pure instinct. "Just keep your voice down, tough guy. We get the food, we eat in silence, and we get back to the safe house. Captain Lewis wants a full brief at 600 hours, and I need at least 4 hours of sleep before I have to look at his face." Despite their quiet demeanor, their presence was causing a noticeable ripple in the diner's stagnant pond. From the moment they had walked through the glass double doors, the ambient chatter had dipped. The bell above the door had chimed, and almost every head had turned. Oak Ridge was a town that prided itself on exclusivity, a polite word for deliberate segregation. Behind the front counter, the night manager, Thomas Wright, stood perfectly still, his eyes darting toward their corner booth every few seconds. Thomas was a man whose entire personality was built on suburban paranoia. He nervously wiped down the same spotless section of the countertop for 5 minutes straight, his lips pressed into a thin, white line. Eventually, he caught the eye of the elderly waitress, Brenda, who was hesitantly walking toward their table with a carafe of coffee. Thomas gave her a sharp, definitive shake of his head, gesturing for her to stay back. Selena noticed the exchange immediately. Her training kicked in, a cold, analytical wave washing over her exhaustion. She kicked Darnell's shin lightly under the table. Don't look now, Selina whispered, leaning forward and pretending to inspect a stain on her coffee mug. But the manager over by the register is having a mild panic attack. He just waved off the waitress. Darnell sighed, a deep, heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of the last year. He didn't turn his head, but his eyes shifted toward the reflection in the dark window beside them. He saw Thomas frantically dialing a number on the wall-mounted landline, his hand cupped over his mouth as he whispered urgently into the receiver. "Unbelievable," Darnell muttered, running a rough hand over his face. "We survived 14 months dealing with armed cartel runners, and we're going to get taken out by a diner manager in a bow tie because we wanted some pancakes." "It's Oak Ridge," Selina replied quietly, her tone laced with bitter resignation. "We don't look like we belong on the golf course, Darnell. We look like exactly what we're pretending to be, street-level hustlers. He's calling local PD. I guarantee it." Darnell's jaw tightened. "If local PD shows up, we play it cool. We have zero identification on us and on us except the aliases. If we flash our real badges, it goes into the local dispatch log. The syndicate has eyes everywhere, including crooked dispatchers. If our real names hit the scanner tonight, the bust tomorrow is blown, and 14 months of work goes straight down the drain." "We hold the line," Selina agreed, her hand instinctively brushing against the side of her jacket, where her service weapon was heavily concealed. "We play the confused, annoyed citizens. We know our rights. We don't give them a reason to escalate." They sat in silence for another 10 minutes. The coffee never came. The diner grew unnervingly quiet. The kind of quiet that precedes a violent storm. The few patrons remaining kept their heads down, aggressively focused on their half-eaten meals, waiting for the inevitable intervention. The bell above the diner door violently jingled, cutting through the heavy silence like a gunshot. Heavy, purposeful footsteps echoed against the linoleum. Officer Brantley Wood had arrived. Wood was a relatively young officer, perhaps pushing 30, but he carried himself with the bloated, aggressive swagger of a man who believed his tin badge granted him absolute sovereignty over the earth. His uniform was pressed to a razor-sharp crease, his boots polished to a mirror shine, and his hands were already resting menacingly on his utility belt. Wood had spent his entire brief career in Oak Ridge, dealing mostly with noise complaints and petty vandalism. He craved action. He craved authority. Most dangerously, he harbored a deep-seated, toxic prejudice that he usually disguised under the banner of proactive policing. Thomas Wright practically sprinted from behind the counter to meet the officer, pointing a shaky, accusatory finger toward the back booth. Wood nodded, a sickeningly eager smirk playing on his lips. He adjusted his heavy-duty belt and began a slow, deliberate march down the narrow aisle, his eyes locked onto Darnell's back. Selina saw him coming. She reached beneath her jacket and silently clicked a small, hidden button on the federal wire strapped to her ribs. A tiny, almost imperceptible buzz against her skin confirmed the device was now active, transmitting live audio directly to the secure servers at the FBI and local precinct command center, where Captain Robert Lewis was overseeing the final stages of Operation Ironclad. "Showtime," Selina whispered, her face falling into a mask of weary indifference. Wood stopped right at the edge of their booth, invading their personal space immediately. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't ask how their night was going. He just stood there, towering over them, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate. "Evening," Wood barked, his voice loud enough to ensure the entire diner was listening. "What exactly are you two doing here?" Darnell slowly looked up from his menu, his expression perfectly composed. He had stared down men who murdered for a living. A jumped-up suburban cop was nothing. "We're trying to order dinner, officer. Or we would be, if anyone would bring us some coffee." Wood's eyes narrowed. He despised defiance, especially from people he had already judged as beneath him. "Is that right? Manager says you've been loitering. Says you're making the other customers uncomfortable. You two don't look like you're from around here." "Since when is eating a crime in Oak Ridge?" Selina interjected, her voice calm, steady, and deliberately articulate. "We sat down 15 minutes ago. We haven't spoken to anyone. We haven't caused a disturbance. Is there a law against sitting in a booth?" Wood shifted his weight, clearly annoyed that they weren't immediately cowering. He leaned in closer, bringing the scent of cheap cologne and stale spearmint gum with him. "I ask the questions here, understand? I need to see some identification from both of you. Right now." Darnell kept his hands flat on the table, entirely visible. "Officer, with all due respect, we haven't committed a crime. We aren't suspected of committing a crime. Under state law, we are not required to provide identification simply for sitting in a public restaurant." Wood's face flushed a deep, ugly shade of red. The veins in his neck visibly bulged. He wasn't used to people knowing their rights, and he certainly wasn't used to being educated on state law by a black man he suspected of being a common criminal. "Let me tell you how this is going to work," Wood sneered, his hand dropping to rest explicitly on the handle of his taser. "You're in my town. People like you come through here looking to boost cars or case houses. You match the description of some suspects we've had in the area." "What description?" Selina challenged smoothly. "Please, officer, enlighten us. What exactly is the description?" Wood leaned down, his face mere inches from Darnell's. Black, aggressive, and uncooperative. "Now I'm going to ask you one last time, before things get real ugly. Hand over your IDs, or I'm dragging you both out of this booth in cuffs." Back at the command center, 20 miles away, Captain Robert Lewis was sitting in a darkened room, surrounded by glowing monitors. The audio from Selina's wire fed directly into the overhead speakers. Lewis, a grizzled veteran of the force, slowly stood up from his chair, his blood running cold. "Who the hell is that?" Lewis demanded, looking at his communications tech. "Running the GPS coordinates now, Captain," the tech replied, fingers flying across the keyboard. "It's Oak Ridge, Harrison's diner. Local PD just dispatched a unit there for a suspicious persons call. Officer Brantley Wood." "Wood is stepping on a 14-month federal op," Lewis growled, grabbing his radio. "Get me the Oak Ridge chief of police on a secure line right now. If Hollister and Martin break cover to get this idiot off their backs, the cartel will know within the hour." Back in the diner, the tension had thickened into something suffocating. Darnell maintained absolute eye contact with Officer Wood. To back down now would break the tough persona he had carefully crafted for the streets, but to push too hard would force an arrest. "We don't have our IDs on us," Darnell lied smoothly, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a subtle, dangerous edge. "Left them at home. We just came out for some food." "You want to ask us to leave? Fine, we'll leave. But we aren't giving you our names because we haven't done anything wrong." Wood scoffed, a cruel, mocking sound. "No IDs? What a surprise. Typical. You people always have an excuse. Stand up, both of you. Out of the booth. Right now." "Are we being detained, officer?" Selina asked, her voice carrying clearly into the hidden microphone. She was deliberately establishing a legal record. Every word Wood said was currently building a massive civil rights lawsuit and a career-ending internal affairs investigation. "You're damn right you're being detained," Wood spat. "Stand up before I make you stand up." Darnell and Selina exchanged a fleeting, invisible glance. The silent communication was absolute. Do not fight back. Let him hang himself. Darnell slid out of the booth first. He moved slowly, deliberately keeping his hands raised to shoulder height. He stood up to his full height, instantly dwarfing Wood by a good 3 inches and 50 pounds of muscle. Wood took a quick, nervous step back, his hand jumping from his taser to the grip of his actual service weapon. "Turn around and put your hands on the table," Wood ordered, his voice cracking slightly with a sudden surge of adrenaline and fear. Darnell complied silently, turning his broad back to the officer and placing his palms flat on the sticky surface of the table. Selina slid out next, moving cautiously, her hands also clearly visible. The rest of the diner was dead silent. The only sound was the heavy rain hitting the roof and the frantic breathing of the manager, Thomas, who was watching from behind the safety of the cash register, looking incredibly pleased with himself. Wood pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. Without warning, he grabbed Darnell's left arm, wrenching it backward with completely unnecessary force. Darnell's instinct, honed by years of combat training and survival on the streets, screamed at him to neutralize the threat. His muscles tensed involuntarily, pulling slightly against Wood's grip. "Stop resisting!" Wood screamed at the top of his lungs, though Darnell had barely moved. It was a classic, desperate tactic, yelling commands to create a false narrative for any witnesses present. "I said stop resisting!" Wood slammed his forearm into the center of Darnell's back, shoving him hard against the edge of the table. The coffee mugs rattled violently. "Hey!" Selina yelled, playing her part perfectly. "He's not fighting you. You're hurting him for no reason." "Shut up and step back!" Wood roared at Selina, snapping one cuff onto Darnell's wrist and twisting the metal aggressively to inflict maximum pain. He locked the other cuff into place, pulling Darnell's arms up high behind his back to force him to bow forward. "Officer Wood," Darnell said, his voice terrifyingly calm despite the burning pain in his shoulders. "You are making a monumental mistake tonight. I strongly suggest you stop and call a supervisor to this location." Wood laughed, a breathless, wild sound. He patted Darnell down aggressively, thoroughly enjoying the complete physical dominance he believed he had established. "I don't need a supervisor for a couple of street trash. You're going in for resisting arrest, failure to identify, and disturbing the peace." "He didn't resist," Selina stated firmly, stepping slightly closer. Wood whipped around, pointing a finger squarely at Selina's chest. "You take one more step, and you're going face down on this linoleum, sweetheart. Turn around. Hands on the table." Selina complied, turning her back. Her mind was racing. If Wood searched her thoroughly, he would find the wire. Worse, he would find her federal-issue Glock, which was not registered under her undercover alias. Wood approached Selina from behind. He didn't put cuffs on her immediately. Instead, he grabbed the thick canvas messenger bag she had slung over her shoulder. "Let's see what you've got in here," Wood muttered, ripping the bag from her shoulder and dumping its contents violently onto the booth table. Out tumbled a messy array of undercover props. A burner phone, some loose cash, a pack of cigarettes she didn't smoke, and at the very bottom, wrapped in a dark cloth, the heavy, unmistakable shape of a firearm. The diner gasped collectively. Brenda, the waitress, actually let out a small shriek. Wood's eyes lit up like a child on Christmas morning. He had hit the jackpot. He lunged forward, unraveling the cloth to reveal the matte black Glock 19. "Well, well, well," Wood gloated, his chest puffing out as he held the weapon up for the manager to see. "Looks like we have a concealed weapon. I knew you two were dirty. I could smell it on you." Back at the command center, Captain Lewis slammed his fist onto his desk, nearly shattering his coffee mug. "He found her service weapon," Lewis barked into the radio. "Where the hell is the Oak Ridge chief? Why isn't he on the line?" "Sir, the chief is asleep. His phone is going to voicemail," the communications tech replied frantically. "Then dispatch our tactical units," Lewis ordered, his voice shaking with absolute rage. "Send 3 unmarked vehicles to that diner right now. Code 3, lights and sirens. Nobody puts my detectives in chains." "Units are rolling," the tech confirmed. ETA is 12 minutes. Inside the diner, Wood was entirely oblivious to the federal storm currently speeding toward him. He slammed Selina against the table, far rougher than necessary, and yanked her hands behind her back, slapping a second pair of cuffs onto her wrists. "You're both looking at hard time," Wood whispered into Selina's ear, a vicious smile playing on his lips. "Carrying an unregistered firearm, resisting a peace officer. You picked the wrong town, trash. Check the serial number on that weapon, officer," Selina said, her voice eerily steady, completely devoid of the fear Wood desperately wanted to see. Wood paused, his ego blinding him to the very obvious warning signs in front of him. Criminals did not usually ask officers to run serial numbers. "What did you say?" I said, "Run the serial number," Selina repeated, turning her head slightly to look him in the eye. "Call it into your dispatch. Right now. I dare you." Wood narrowed his eyes. He grabbed his shoulder mic, pressing the button. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I have 2 subjects detained at Harrison's diner. I need a run on a recovered firearm. Serial number." He squinted at the barrel of the Glock, reading the numbers aloud. He released the mic, waiting for the inevitable confirmation that the gun was stolen. 10 seconds passed. Then 20. Finally, the radio crackled. The voice of the Oak Ridge dispatcher came through, but she didn't sound bored anymore. She sounded terrified. "Unit 4. Wood, please confirm that serial number." Wood rolled his eyes, pressing the mic again. "I gave you the number, dispatch. Just tell me who it belongs to." "Wood." The dispatcher's voice shook visibly over the radio waves. "That serial number, it's returning restricted. It's flagged in the federal database." Wood frowned, his arrogant smirk faltering for the first time. "What does that mean? It's stolen from the feds." "No, Wood," the dispatcher said, her voice dropping to a panicked whisper. "It means it's property of the United States Department of Justice. The system is overriding my terminal. A federal supervisor is demanding to speak with you immediately on Channel 1. Wood stood frozen in the middle of the diner. The neon lights outside flashed, casting long, dark shadows across the room. He looked at Darnell, who was still handcuffed, leaning casually against the table. Darnell finally smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator watching a trap spring shut. "Like I said, Brantley," Darnell whispered softly. A monumental mistake. Fear finally pierced the arrogant armor that Officer Brantley Wood had worn since he first pinned on his badge. He stood completely frozen in the middle of Harrison's family diner, the static from his shoulder radio hissing like an angry snake. The dispatcher's panicked warning echoed in his mind, wrestling with his massive ego. He looked down at the matte black Glock 9 in his trembling hand, suddenly realizing it felt incredibly heavy. Wood swallowed hard, his throat entirely dry. He stared at Darnell Hollister, who was still handcuffed and bent over the table, yet somehow exuded absolute authority. The dynamic in the room had shifted violently. The hunter had just realized he was in a cage with lions. "What is this?" Wood stammered, taking a clumsy step back, pointing the barrel of the federal weapon toward the floor. "What kind of scam are you two running? Fake serial numbers? You think you can hack a police database?" Selina Martin let out a short, cold laugh that cut through the diner's heavy silence. She turned her head as much as her restricted position allowed, fixing Wood with a stare that could freeze boiling water. "You really are that dense, aren't you, Brantley? You're standing on the tracks, staring right at the headlights, and you still don't think the train is coming." "Shut up!" Wood yelled, though his voice lacked the booming confidence from 10 minutes prior. It cracked, high and desperate. He looked wildly over at the manager, Thomas Wright, who had shrunk down behind the cash register, his face drained of all color. Thomas was slowly realizing that the people he had racially profiled were not the easy targets he had assumed. "Take the cuffs off, officer," Darnell advised, his tone conversational, as if he were discussing the weather rather than his own false arrest. "Take them off right now. Put the weapon down on the table and step back. If you do that, maybe you only do 5 years in a federal penitentiary instead of 10. Wood's face twisted into a mask of pure panic and stubborn rage. His brain simply refused to accept the realities of his situation. He was a cop in Oak Ridge. He was the law. These two were just street trash. They had to be. "I'm not taking the cuffs off anyone," Wood snarled, his hand drifting back toward his taser. "I don't care what kind of sophisticated federal spoofing you've got on your little gun. You're going to the county jail, and we'll let the detectives sort this out." He never got the chance to escort them anywhere. Outside the diner, the heavy, rhythmic drumming of the rain was suddenly drowned out by the roaring engines of 3 unmarked, matte black Chevrolet Tahoes tearing into the parking lot. They did not park in the designated spaces. They jumped the curb, tires tearing through the pristine landscaping, and slammed into a V formation, directly blocking the diner's glass double doors. Hidden grill lights erupted into a blinding barrage of red and blue strobes, illuminating the dark diner with aggressive, flashing urgency. Thomas let out a pathetic whimper, dropping entirely out of sight behind the counter. Before the Tahoes even came to a complete halt, their doors swung open. Heavily armed tactical agents wearing dark tactical gear and body armor with FBI emblazoned across the chest in stark yellow lettering swarmed the entrance. They moved with terrifying, coordinated precision, rifles raised, securing the perimeter in seconds. The diner doors were shoved violently open, shattering the small welcome bell above them. Striding right through the middle of the tactical team was Captain Robert Lewis. He was a formidable man in his late 50s, wearing a soaked trench coat over a rumpled suit, his face carved from pure granite. He did not look angry. He looked absolutely lethal. "Secure the room," Lewis barked, his voice echoing off the linoleum. "Nobody moves. Nobody speaks." Wood stood paralyzed, his eyes wide as saucers, as 4 laser sights immediately painted his chest. His hands shot up instinctively, dropping Selina's weapon onto the nearest table with a loud clatter. "Don't shoot!" Wood screamed, his voice breaking completely. "I'm Oak Ridge PD. I'm a police officer." Lewis walked slowly down the aisle, his heavy boots crushing a discarded paper napkin. He didn't even look at Wood at first. He walked straight past him, stopping at the booth where his 2 top undercover detectives were currently handcuffed, like common criminals. Lewis stared at the steel cuffs biting into Darnell's wrists, the muscle in his jaw feathered. "Get these off them," Lewis ordered quietly. 2 tactical agents rushed forward with universal keys. Within seconds, the cuffs clicked open. Darnell rolled his broad shoulders, wincing slightly as blood rushed back into his hands. Selina rubbed her wrists, stepping away from the booth and standing tall beside her partner. Lewis finally turned his attention to Wood, who was visibly shaking, backed up against a neighboring booth. "Officer Brantley Wood," Lewis said, reading the nameplate on the young cop's chest. "Badge number 4042. My name is Captain Robert Lewis, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Joint Narcotics Task Force." Wood opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. "You," Lewis continued, stepping into Wood's personal space, "have just assaulted 2 senior federal undercover detectives. You have unlawfully detained them, physically assaulted them, and illegally searched their property without probable cause, a warrant, or even a basic understanding of the law. You have done this in direct violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law." I didn't know," Wood stammered, his eyes darting frantically around the room, looking for anyone to help him. "The manager. He called it in. He said they were suspicious. They wouldn't give me their IDs." Darnell stepped forward, his towering presence making Wood shrink back even further. "We didn't give you our IDs because we didn't have to, Brantley. And because, if we had handed you our real credentials, your radio chatter would have alerted the most dangerous narcotics syndicate on the East Coast that federal agents were sitting in Oak Ridge." Wood's knees visibly buckled. "I was just doing my job." "Your job is to uphold the law," Selina interjected, her voice sharp as glass. "Not to invent it when you see people whose skin color offends your delicate suburban sensibilities." Lewis held up a hand, silencing the room. "Turn around, Wood." Wood blinked, tears of sheer panic welling in his eyes. "What?" "I said turn around and put your hands behind your back," Lewis commanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "You are under federal arrest for civil rights violations, assault on federal officers, and interference with an ongoing federal investigation. If you hesitate, my men will put you on the floor and do it for you." Slowly, utterly defeated, Wood turned around. The arrogant swagger was entirely gone, replaced by the pathetic slump of a man whose life had just disintegrated. One of the tactical agents stepped forward, unholstered Wood's own steel handcuffs from the duty belt, and aggressively clicked them onto Wood's wrists. The metallic sound echoed through the silent diner, a beautiful, undeniable note of karma. "Take his badge," Lewis ordered. "Strip his weapon. Put him in the back of Tahoe 2. I don't want to look at him anymore." As Wood was aggressively frog-marched out the door into the pouring rain, crying openly, Lewis turned his attention toward the front counter. "Mr. Wright," Lewis called out. Slowly, the top of Thomas Wright's head appeared over the cash register. He looked physically ill, his pristine bow tie crooked. "Yes, sir?" Thomas squeaked. "You and I are going to have a very long conversation about the false police report you filed tonight," Lewis said calmly. "But right now, I need you to lock the doors and pull the blinds. This diner is officially closed. It is now a federal staging ground. Within 20 minutes, Harrison's family diner had been entirely locked down. The few patrons had been thoroughly vetted, sworn to silence under threat of federal prosecution, and sent home. The Oak Ridge chief of police, a balding, heavily perspiring man named Richard Sullivan, had arrived in a panic, practically begging Captain Lewis for forgiveness and promising full cooperation in Wood's prosecution. Darnell and Selina sat in a booth near the kitchen, drinking fresh coffee that one of the tactical agents had brewed. Despite the adrenaline, the exhaustion of the past 14 months was creeping back in. Lewis walked over and slid into the booth across from them. He looked older than his 58 years. "Are you two okay?" Lewis asked, his eyes scanning them for injuries. "Sore wrists, wounded pride," Darnell said, taking a sip of the black coffee. "Nothing permanent." "But Captain," Wood read the serial number over the open air. The dispatcher flagged it. "We have to assume the cartel's inside man at the dispatch center heard the whole thing. Operation Ironclad is blown." Selina nodded grimly, staring down at her scarred hands. 14 months. We were 12 hours away from ripping the head off the snake, and it gets derailed by a racist rookie with a chip on his shoulder. Lewis remained silent for a long moment. He pulled a secure satellite phone from his coat pocket and set it on the table. A small green light on the top was blinking rhythmically. "That's what I thought, too," Lewis said, a strange, tight smile forming on his lips. "When I heard Wood call it in, I almost had a heart attack. I assumed the cartel's dispatch mole would immediately notify Arturo." Arturo was the mid-level distributor they had met with earlier that evening, the gateway to the syndicate's boss. "So why haven't we pulled the plug?" Selina asked, her brow furrowing. "If they know we're feds, they're currently burning the safe houses and fleeing across the border." Lewis tapped the satellite phone. "Our wiretap tech at Command Center had just forwarded me an intercepted phone call. It happened 10 minutes ago, right as we were putting Wood in the back of the Tahoe. Arturo called his boss." Darnell leaned forward, the exhaustion suddenly vanishing. And? Lewis chuckled softly, a sound of pure disbelief. "It turns out Arturo is just as paranoid as we are. He didn't trust you two. After your meeting tonight, he had some of his street soldiers follow you here to Oak Ridge. They were sitting in a black sedan across the street the entire time." Selina's eyes widened. She looked out the window into the darkness, realizing how close they had been to getting made by the cartel's surveillance. "They were watching the diner?" "They watched the whole thing," Lewis confirmed. "They watched a racist local cop walk in, harass you, throw you in cuffs, and dump your bags on the table. And then they heard the dispatch radio chatter." "Wait," Darnell said, holding up a hand. "If they heard the radio chatter about the federal database flag, they know Selina's weapon belongs to the DOJ. "Yes, they do," Lewis said, his smile widening. "But you have to think like a criminal, Darnell. Arturo didn't hear a federal agent getting busted. He heard that his new, highly capable street distributors are currently walking around with stolen federal firearms." Darnell and Selina stared at their captain in stunned silence. Lewis laughed outright now, The mole didn't warn Arturo that you were cops. The mole confirmed Arturo's belief that you are exactly who you say you are. High-level, dangerous players who have the guts to carry stolen DOJ property and the discipline not to crack when a local beat cop roughs you up. Arturo told his boss that you two held the line, didn't panic, and that the heat was strictly local profiling. He thinks you're the real deal. The profound irony of the situation settled over the booth like a heavy blanket. Wood's arrogant, bigoted, reckless behavior, the exact thing that should have gotten them killed and ruined the entire federal operation, had inadvertently provided them with the ultimate, unbreakable alibi. The cartel had watched them get profiled and brutalized by the police, cementing their street credibility permanently. Selina let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for a year. She leaned back against the red vinyl seat, shaking her head. I don't believe it. The universe actually has a sense of humor. It gets better, Lewis added, pocketing the phone. Because Wood called in the serial number, Arturo thinks the feds are going to be locking down Oak Ridge to investigate the stolen gun. He just moved tomorrow's meetup by 6 hours. He wants to do the exchange at 0400 at the main warehouse by the docks. And he's bringing the boss. Darnell cracked a massive, genuine smile, exposing white teeth against his thick beard. He's bringing the boss? To the docks? The entire syndicate leadership will be in one room, Lewis confirmed. All because Officer Wood wanted to play tough guy at a diner. Darnell looked at Selina, the fire entirely back in his eyes. We need to get to the armory. We're green-lit. What about Wood? Selina asked, looking toward the door where the Tahoes were idling in the rain. Wood's career is over, Lewis said coldly. He's going to federal holding tonight. Tomorrow the DOJ will formally charge him. And when this bust goes down, the media is going to find out exactly how a corrupt, racist cop almost tanked the biggest narcotics bust in state history. He won't just lose his badge. He's going to serve hard time in a facility where ex-cops don't exactly thrive. Darnell stood up from the booth, stretching his massive frame. He looked over at the front counter, where Thomas Wright was currently sobbing quietly into his hands, realizing that his own prejudice was going to cost him his business and likely result in aiding and abetting charges. Karma, Darnell thought, rarely arrived so perfectly packaged. But when it did, it was a beautiful thing to witness. Let's go, partner, Darnell said, grabbing his faded denim jacket. We have a cartel to dismantle. Rain continued to pour in relentless sheets by the time 0400 hours rolled around, turning the industrial docks of the city's eastern harbor into a desolate, slippery labyrinth of rust and shipping containers. The air smelled heavily of salt, decaying kelp, and diesel exhaust. Hidden in the shadows of a towering, dilapidated warehouse, Darnell Hollister and Selina Martin sat in the front seats of a battered Ford pickup truck. They had swapped their previous casual undercover gear for tactical vests worn entirely beneath bulky, dark winter coats. Operation Ironclad was no longer a slow-burn intelligence-gathering mission. It had transformed into a rapid-strike tactical execution. Every shadow, every rusted crane, and every empty shipping container surrounding Warehouse 42 currently hid heavily armed federal agents. Captain Robert Lewis was perched in a mobile command center 2 miles away, watching the thermal imaging feeds provided by high-altitude drones circling silently above the storm clouds. "Comms check," Selina whispered, adjusting the earpiece hidden deep within her ear canal. "Loud and clear, Martin." Lewis's voice crackled softly in her ear. "We have multiple vehicles approaching from the South Access Road. 4 black SUVs. They are running without headlights. This is it. Stay sharp, both of you." Darnell took a deep breath, staring out through the rain-streaked windshield. He patted the heavy government-issued Glock now resting comfortably in his shoulder holster. The very weapon that had almost gotten them killed by a racist cop just a few hours prior was now their ultimate ticket into the syndicate's inner circle. "Showtime," Darnell murmured. The 4 SUVs rolled into the warehouse parking lot like silent predators, their heavy tires crunching over broken glass and wet gravel. They parked in a defensive diamond formation, a classic tactical maneuver designed to provide 360-degree cover. Doors opened simultaneously. 12 men stepped out into the freezing rain, holding compact submachine guns concealed under long trench coats. From the center vehicle emerged Arturo, the mid-level distributor they had met earlier. He was a nervous, wiry man who always looked like he was vibrating with anxiety. But tonight, his anxiety was eclipsed by the sheer terror emanating from the man walking directly behind him. Dominic Rossi, known on the streets simply as the Architect, had not been seen in public in 3 years. Rossi was a phantom, a ruthless mastermind who controlled the flow of narcotics across 3 states from the absolute shadows. The FBI didn't even have a recent photograph of him. Seeing him step out into the rain, a tall, impeccably dressed man with sharp, predatory features and a silver-tipped cane, sent a jolt of pure adrenaline straight through Darnell's chest. "Target is confirmed," Darnell whispered into his collar. "Rossi is on site. I repeat, the Architect is in the open." "Copy that, Hollister," Lewis replied, his voice tense with anticipation. "Hold your positions. Let them initiate." Darnell and Selina stepped out of the truck, their hands raised slightly, showing they were not immediately hostile but also not intimidated. They walked slowly toward the center of the formation, rain soaking their hair and running down their faces. The cartel soldiers tightened their grip on their weapons, their eyes darting aggressively between the 2 undercover detectives and the dark corners of the warehouse lot. Arturo stepped forward, flanked by 2 massive enforcers. He looked at Darnell, then at Selina, a nervous smirk twitching on his lips. "You 2 had a rough night, I hear," Arturo said, raising his voice over the sound of the storm. "My guys said the local pigs out in Oak Ridge put you in steel, shook you down in a diner." Darnell spat on the wet asphalt, perfectly channeling the furious, disrespected street hustler he was pretending to be. "Some jumped-up rookie thought he could make a name for himself, tried to pin a resisting charge on me because he didn't like the color of my skin. Looked through our bags, found the piece we took off that federal transport last month." Rossi stepped out from behind Arturo. The cartel boss moved with terrifying grace, his eyes locking on to Darnell like a hawk spotting prey. The atmosphere in the lot instantly grew 10 degrees colder. "My man in the dispatch center heard the radio call," Rossi said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone that completely betrayed his brutal nature. He said the weapon flagged as Department of Justice property. He said the officer who found it called it in over an open channel. "Yeah, he did," Selina interjected smoothly, crossing her arms. "And because he was an arrogant idiot, he didn't realize what he was holding until it was too late. We played it cool, let him make a fool of himself, and walked out while his superiors were busy screaming at him for stepping on a federal serial number. He gave us our stuff back and practically threw us out the door just to cover his own tracks." Rossi stared at her, unblinking. He was analyzing every micro-expression, every shift in their body language. The tension was so thick it could be cut with a machete, if Rossi suspected for even a fraction of a second that they were law enforcement. 12 automatic weapons would tear Darnell and Selina to pieces before Captain Lewis could even blink. A slow, chilling smile spread across Rossi's face. "You kept your mouth shut," Rossi commended, tapping his cane on the asphalt. "You had a stolen federal firearm on a table in front of you, a racist cop breathing down your neck, and you didn't crack. Arturo told me you were professionals. I didn't believe him. But surviving an Oak Ridge shakedown with federal heat in your bag? That requires discipline." Rossi gestured to one of his men, who stepped forward, carrying 2 heavy, metal-reinforced briefcases. $3 million in uncut product. "Just as we agreed," Rossi said. "This is just the trial run. If you can move this through your urban channels without drawing heat, we will do 10 times this amount next month." Darnell stepped forward, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He unclasped the first briefcase, revealing neat, tightly packed bricks of pure narcotics wrapped in heavy plastic. It was enough evidence to put Rossi away for 3 consecutive lifetimes. "Looks good, Rossi," Darnell said, his voice steady. He reached up, casually wiping the rain from his forehead. It was the predetermined tactical signal. The entire world exploded into chaos. High-intensity floodlights mounted on the surrounding cranes snapped on, turning the pitch-black parking lot into a blinding arena of pure white light. The sudden illumination was so intense that Rossi and his men instinctively threw their hands up, completely blinded. "FBI, nobody move! Drop your weapons!" The thunderous commands echoed from high-powered megaphones on all sides. From the shadows, 36 heavily armored tactical agents swarmed the perimeter, assault rifles raised and locked onto targets. Drones dropped lower, their rotors screaming over the storm. Rossi's enforcers panicked. One of them raised his submachine gun, aiming blindly toward the wall of light. Before he could pull the trigger, Darnell closed the distance. Moving with explosive speed, he swept the enforcer's legs out from under him, disarming the man before he even hit the wet pavement. Selina pivoted, drawing her weapon and pressing the barrel directly against Arturo's forehead, freezing the mid-level dealer entirely in place. "Don't even breathe, Arturo," Selina commanded, her voice slicing through the noise. Rossi stood perfectly still, his cane resting in the puddle at his feet. The arrogant smile was entirely gone, replaced by the grim realization of a man who had finally been outplayed. He looked at Darnell, then down at the federal badge that Darnell had just pulled from beneath his jacket and hung around his neck. "You," Rossi whispered, his eyes widening in profound shock. "You're the feds. Senior Detective Darnell Hollister," Darnell replied, snapping heavy steel cuffs onto Rossi's wrists. "And you, Dominic, are under arrest for federal narcotics trafficking, racketeering, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it." Within 90 seconds, the entire syndicate leadership was disarmed, bound, and pushed into the back of armored federal transport vans. Not a single shot had been fired. The biggest drug bust on the eastern seaboard had been executed flawlessly, directly because a corrupt local cop's prejudice had inadvertently cemented their undercover alibis. As the flashing red and blue lights painted the rainy docks, Captain Lewis walked up to Darnell and Selina, a rare, genuine smile breaking across his weathered face. "Outstanding work," Lewis said, shaking both of their hands. "We got Rossi. We got the product. We got the entire distribution network. Operation Ironclad is a definitive success." Selina looked down at the briefcase full of evidence, then out toward the city skyline. "You know, Captain, part of me almost wants to send Officer Wood a thank you card. If he hadn't racially profiled us at that diner, Rossi never would have shown his face tonight." "Don't worry," Lewis chuckled darkly. "Wood is going to get exactly what he deserves." 6 months later, the sterile, wood-paneled walls of the Federal District Courthouse in downtown Manhattan provided a stark contrast to the greasy linoleum of Harrison's family diner. Brantley Wood sat at the defense table, but he looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant, puffed-up patrol officer who had swaggered down the diner aisle. The sharp uniform was gone, replaced by a drab, ill-fitting orange jumpsuit. He had lost weight, his skin was pale, and his hands shook uncontrollably as they rested on the wooden table. Behind him, the gallery was packed to absolute capacity. The trial had become a massive national media sensation, the story of a racist suburban cop who illegally assaulted 2 undercover black federal detectives, nearly destroying a massive cartel sting in the process, had ignited a firestorm of public outrage. At the prosecution table sat United States Attorney Benjamin Hayes, a man known for aggressively pursuing corrupt law enforcement officers. He had methodically, ruthlessly dismantled Wood's defense over the past 2 weeks, playing the clear, undeniably damning audio from Selina's wire over and over again for the jury. Judge Arthur Pendleton, an older, stern man with zero tolerance for the abuse of power, looked down from the bench with open disgust. "Brantley Wood," Judge Pendleton's voice boomed through the silent courtroom, heavy with absolute authority. You were sworn to protect and serve the public. Instead, you weaponized your badge to terrorize two innocent people simply because they did not fit your prejudiced view of who belonged in your town. Your actions were fueled by arrogance, bigotry, and a grotesque misunderstanding of the law. Wood stared at the floor, tears silently streaming down his pale cheeks. There was no defiance left in him, only crushing regret. Furthermore, Judge Pendleton continued, your reckless, illegal actions directly endangered the lives of two senior federal officers and came within a razor's edge of destroying a massive federal operation. You are a disgrace to the uniform, and you are a danger to a free society. The judge struck his gavel. The sound cracked like a rifle shot. It is the sentence of this court that you, Brantley Wood, serve 144 months, 12 years, in the Federal Correctional Institution at Allenwood, a maximum security facility. You will serve this time without the possibility of early parole. A collective gasp echoed through the gallery. 12 years in a maximum security federal prison. For a former police officer who had abused his power, it was essentially a waking nightmare. As the federal marshals grabbed Wood by the arms and dragged him out of the courtroom, he looked back one last time. Sitting in the back row of the gallery, dressed in impeccably tailored suits, were Darnell Hollister and Selina Martin. They didn't smile. They didn't gloat. They simply watched him face the absolute consequences of his own hatred. Wood broke down completely, sobbing as the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung shut, sealing his fate. The hard karma did not stop with Wood. Back in Oak Ridge, the fallout had been apocalyptic for Thomas Wright. When the audio of his false police report was released to the public, the backlash was immediate and merciless. Protests erupted outside Harrison's family diner. The wealthy residents of Oak Ridge, eager to distance themselves from the scandal, boycotted the establishment entirely. Within 3 months, Thomas Wright was forced to declare bankruptcy. The diner was boarded up, the neon sign permanently switched off, leaving Thomas a financially ruined pariah in a town that refused to acknowledge his existence. The Oak Ridge Police Department was placed under a massive federal consent decree, completely stripping Chief Richard Sullivan of his authority and gutting the department's aggressive, discriminatory policing tactics. Later that evening, far away from the flashing cameras and the media circus, Darnell and Selina sat in a quiet, upscale jazz club in the city. The lighting was low, the music was smooth, and there was not a single threat in the room. They raised their glasses, the crystal clinking softly. "To karma," Darnell said, a warm, genuine smile reaching his eyes. "To karma," Selina echoed, taking a sip of her drink. "And to never eating diner pancakes again." They laughed, a sound of pure relief and hard-earned victory. The undercover jackets were hung up, the aliases retired. Rossi was locked away forever, and a toxic cop had been removed from the streets. They had held the line, turned a desperate situation into a master stroke, and let the universe handle the rest. Sometimes the most poetic justice doesn't require a badge or a gun. It just requires letting a fool dig his own grave. This dramatic, true crime-inspired story shows that absolute karma always comes around. When hate and arrogance blind you, the universe has a funny way of bringing the hammer down. If you were captivated by this intense, undercover sting and the satisfying justice at the end, make sure to hit that like button, share this incredible story with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, dramatic narratives where the bad guys get exactly what they deserve. Drop a comment below telling us what you thought of Wood's fate. Stay safe out there.